In this lesson, we're going to look at the factors of production. A lot of times now so far we've been referring to resources, and more specifically when we do that, we're really talking about these factors of production. So the first thing we want to talk about is determining productivity. Now, if you remember from the very first lesson on the basic principles, one of the things we talked about was how productivity influences your standard of living, and the more productive you are, the higher your standard of living is. So that was from Principle 8, the importance of productivity. So I put it back in here. So since a country's standard of living can be traced to its productivity levels, then it stands to reason that the greater number of factors of production a country can acquire, then the greater the potential for productivity. So let's think about this. Standard of living is directly related to your productivity levels. And make sure you have that. The second part here is the fact that your standard of living can also be traced to the number of the factors of production a country. Now you'll notice here I said can acquire. So when we talk about this from this perspective, can acquire, well, how do people acquire goods? That's through trade. So even if a country doesn't have a particular factor of production, they can acquire them through trade. So what you have and what you can acquire in terms of the factors of production determine your productivity levels, which also determine your ability to increase your standard of living. So then we see this potential for productivity based on those following things. So the standard of living is related to the ability to produce. The ability to produce is based on the ability to acquire the factors of production. Really, really, really important point. So let's talk about what those factors are. Okay, so let's look at the factors of production. So our first one is land. So all things supplied by nature and used in the production of goods and services. One of the easy things to think about with land is not anything that man has ever created. It's everything that man uses in nature. We don't create anything in terms of land. So when we talk about the forest and the trees, when we talk about ores like coal or even minerals that we see, large areas of fields for farming, even the ability to purchase land just to put buildings on it, and water. So basically everything around us that was produced in nature is considered land. And so we look at those as resources, and we kind of break it down into two types of natural resources. And this is something you learned way back in elementary school. So the first are the renewable resources, water and replanted trees. These are the things within nature that we can access over and over and over again. If we're smart about what we're doing and every time we cut a tree down, we plant one, well, then we always have access to those trees. Water is a renewable resource as long as, of course, we don't ruin it through pollution and things of this nature. And then we have non-renewable resources such as minerals and fossil fuels. One of the primary topics of discussion constantly within global politics is this fossil fuels. If you think coal, oil, natural gas, all of these things that we use to basically drive everything we see, our cars, our electricity, all of those are from non-renewable resources. And of course, what that means is at some point down the road, we will lose all of those resources. We will eventually run out of coal. We will eventually run out of oil. We will eventually run out of natural gas. Therefore, scientists are looking for ways to generate electricity through renewable resources such as hydroelectricity or using wind power or solar power. So our second factor of production is labor. And of course, now we're referring to the human population. So all human effort which goes into the production of goods and services is considered labor. In other words, what we produce. We have all of this land and all of these natural resources, but they don't mean anything unless we have the ability to produce something with them. Thus, labor comes into play. Now, what we want to look at though is this population. You'll notice, if you really look at it closely, from basically 1800 through about 1950, population grew fairly slow. There wasn't a significant increase in the global populations until about this point here. Basically in the 1950s, following World War II, there was a significant increase in global population. You can see here by 2020, global population is expected to be 7 billion or greater. In other words, our population is continuing to rise. What that means, of course, is there's a greater number of laborers. There's more and more laborers. So labor is one of these resources in which we see it constantly expanding. Now, you have to look at it a little bit closer though. So I put here this U.S. unemployment rate. Now this is from 1980 to 2012. Now you'll notice it goes up and down. So it's not static. It rises and it falls. And remember, one of the things we talked about with Phillips curve is that inflation has the ability to temporarily decrease unemployment. So to give you an idea of that, this is 2008. See 2008 right here? If we look at 2008, you notice there's a spike in the unemployment rate. It goes up, and then you'll see it goes down here around 2010. So it varies. Our unemployment rate fluctuates, and what that means, of course, is even though our population is increasing and we have more laborers, doesn't necessarily mean that those laborers are going to have jobs. And that's one of the aspects of why we always have unemployment. We simply have more people than we have jobs available. So that's one of those things to understand. And of course, when inflation occurs, unemployment goes down temporarily. So that means more people are getting jobs. Now, one of the primary aspects of labor is what we call human capital. And human capital is knowledge. And you can look at this right here, and this will give you an idea about educational attainment. In other words, the more educated your population is, the higher their standard of living, because educational increases generate increases in productivity. So you'll notice that over time, we see a decrease in the number of people dropping out of high school. So by 2012, only 12.4% of the population had less than a high school diploma. Then you get into the red area, high school or some college. So what we see is that 56.7% of the population between age 25 and over, they graduated from high school or they had some college courses. Maybe they didn't finish college. Maybe they went 2 years and they got an associate's degree. And then we look at the green. And you'll notice the green gets a little bit larger towards the end. In other words, more and more people, and specifically women, are earning bachelor's degrees or higher. So in other words, the greater your education level amongst your entire population, the greater your productivity levels are, and thus an increase in your standard of living. Okay, now our third, capital. So remember, we looked at land, we looked at labor. Now we're going to look at capital. So capital is anything made by man. Capital is man-made. So when we talked about land, land is everything made in nature, the resources. Capital is everything produced by humans. So buildings, machinery, things of this nature. So there's three basic types of capital we can kind of break it down into. The first would be fixed capital. These are buildings, vehicles, these are stocks. These are things that, like for example, a building, these are your factories and things of this nature. Then we have our social, which is like community owned, such as roads, sewers, these types of things that are built in order for the community to progress, to move, for transportation. Then we have working. So man-made raw materials and partially finished goods. Think about it like this. Nature produces raw materials. Man has the ability to do so as well. For example, synthetic oil. Rubber comes from trees, but we also have the ability to produce it synthetically. Polyester is a synthetic material. So these are man-made raw materials. So when we talk about that capital, we're looking at three basic types of capital in terms of what we're doing with that factor of production. Okay, so let's look at our fourth factor of production, what we're calling enterprise or entrepreneurship. These are individuals or groups of people. These are people with the initiative to organize the land, labor, and capital through their wealth. You have to understand that we have the land, we have the labor, we have the capital. What we need are individuals with money who have the ability to develop the land, hire the labor, and build the capital. So the first three factors of production are really not important if we don't have the fourth. So they all work together. We need some combination of all four factors in order to actually be able to be productive. Now, when we talk about our entrepreneurs, these are people who bear the risk. They are taking a risk. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Warren Buffett. These are all individuals, they are entrepreneurs who took a risk with their wealth in order to organize land, labor, and capital. So the production of every good and service requires a certain combination of each factor, and that's important. It takes all four factors of some combination. And so the more of these factors you can acquire, the more productive you can be. So basically we put here on this little chart, so we have land, labor, enterprise, and capital. So these are the factors of production. And of course, they're the key to increasing a country's standard of living. This is the key, some combination of these four factors. And the more you acquire, the more productive you are able to be. Okay, so some people would argue that technology is a factor of production. I do not consider technology a factor of production. Rather, I consider technology to be something that you would call maybe an accelerant. And to give you an idea what I'm talking about, technology is the key to increased efficiency in our use of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. In other words, the ability to be more efficient in the four factors of production is based on our ability to use technology. And so if we look at it and we say, okay, the goal is to make the most while expending the least, that is the definition of efficiency. And so in order to be efficient, and the more efficient we can be, is our ability to use technology. Okay, so let's finish our lesson on the factors of production with this. So I've got this in here, and it says the moral of the story is that technology makes the use of the factors of production more efficient. Understand that efficiency is our goal. We talk about this trade-off between efficiency and equity, but with a business, you're trying to be efficient. You're trying to use the absolute most of your resources while basically expending the least amount of money or the least amount of effort. So therefore, technology is very valuable. Poor countries can increase productivity by acquiring more technology. The single biggest export for the United States now is information technology. It's our knowledge that people want to acquire. It's our knowledge of technology, and that's what they want to acquire.